Thanks very much. Often you hear people talk about victimless crimes. And when this government talks about the crisis of homelessness, they talk about it in a way that it's a criminalist crime. That there's this massive crime of homelessness that exists, but nobody really knows who's responsible. I mean, we know who the victims are of the housing crisis that we have. It's the 1,500 children in emergency accommodation. It's the thousands of adults in emergency accommodation. It's the tens of thousands of people who are now on the precipice of homelessness, who we all meet through our work. It's the 100,000 people on the 100,000 families on the social housing waiting lists. It's the people trapped with rents that they simply can't afford, with mortgages that they can't afford. But we also know who the criminals are, and it doesn't wash the idea of the crocodile tears from the government about all of this. The government has made political choices that has resulted in the tsunami of homelessness that we see at the moment. The leading homelessness charities, they acknowledge that the direct cause, the leading number one cause, is the cut to rent allowance. Go back to listen to what Joan Burton said. At the time of the cut, there will be no incidence of homelessness due to these changes. There was and is an incidence of homelessness due to those changes. Look at the choices that the government continues to make in terms of not using the NAMA properties that exist. The 1 in 8 hotels in this state that are owned by NAMA that could easily be refurbished and be used as decent emergency accommodation from people. Or most crucially, look at it, which is the continuation of the idea of the government and the tying of the government to the idea that you have to incentivise the private sector to go and build homes at double the cost, as we heard last night in RTE, of what it would cost for the state to go and invest directly. But there are different political choices that can be made, and they're choices that involve breaking with the logic that says the market rules, only the market can provide housing, and saying the state should immediately be involved. Immediately refurbishing the NAMA hotels, using them to provide decent emergency accommodation. Immediate rent controls linked to average incomes, and a reversal of the rent allowance cuts until they come into place. A writing down of mortgages to affordable levels. And most importantly, we need investment to clear the housing list by 2018. €10 billion, if invested directly by the state, which is the cheapest way of doing it by far, could build 100,000 homes, could create tens of thousands of jobs, and could wipe out our housing problem and transform the economy while doing it. The government is going to have to be forced into doing this. They're not going to volunteer to do it. They're not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart. And there's lessons from the movement against the water charges. The combination of mass protest and civil disobedience to force action. Because the homeless people and those on the precipice of homelessness, they're not just victims. They can be actors for justice and for the building of homes. And so I salute those who occupied the NAMA houses in West Dublin last week. They're an inspiration for all of us, but they're also an inspiration to homeless people and those threatened with homelessness. For people not to leave their homes, to refuse to give up their homes unless they have somewhere else to go, but also to occupy NAMA buildings, NAMA hotels, NAMA houses, and say we demand these to show that the resources exist. Tie that into mass protests, forcing and demanding immediate action by this government for what is now the #1 political issue, and demanding an immediate change.